it's like everybody's got their own reservoir. Okay, and some of them are weak and they break. Some of them are elastic. They get bigger. The capacity gets larger over time, and sometimes it gets to a point where there's so much, a little bit leaks off the side. But you got to have that reservoir, and hopefully it's strong, because you certainly don't want it to bust. You don't want it to burst. You don't want everything to just come out the bottom, and then you just become completely ineffective. But I think with everybody, and I think you guys see this, there's a certain point where this is too heavy. I got to do something. Don't always know what that is, and it could be anything. I mean, it could be getting out in the woods. It could be hanging out with your friends. It could be drinking. It could be. I mean, everybody's got different ways to alleviate the weight of that burden. But you got to have a pretty healthy cup for everything to pour into, I think.
It translates into, what you're saying is basically coping mechanisms, and sometimes we look at that as a bad word. I mean, that you have to cope with something, but the fact is that cops are people too.
Yep.
Cops have.
They should be.
Yeah, anyway. They should be. Yeah, and it's we talk about the emotional sometimes like it's a bad thing, but really, I think God gave us our emotions for a reason, and it's not wrong to express those. The difference is learning to be able to do your job in a professional manner, and learning to be able to ventilate. At the right times to the right people. And that's not a bad thing. It's a bad thing if you're on a scene and you can't control your emotions, because then you can't do your friggin' job. But if you deal with your job, with the situation, and then you come home and you're not in a situation where you can vent those things, or talk through it with your spouse, or spend some time throwing the ball with your kids or something like that, you don't have some way to work out those emotions, then you get what you're talking about, where that reservoir starts getting, it starts getting to a point where it fractures, and you have a meltdown or something like
everything.
that. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think we've all worked with people who their reservoir is it's met the limit, or it's shattered.
Probably a long time ago.
It's really small.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen guys just crumble on scenes.
Yeah.
And it's
even in training.
Yeah, and it's just, training is the worst when you can't even get them to perform. When they're by themselves. That's extremely dangerous for everybody. But I mean, watching a guy who's got 10 or 15 years, or I've seen guys with even less time on, just fracture on a scene. They just come unglued. And I just think it's that emotional release. It's that one little incident that added just one too many drops to it. And before you know it, everything's just unloaded.
Yeah, it's dangerous. It's full of unresolved trauma, unresolved issues, whatever. And then it takes that one event to kind of throw them to a point where they're ineffective. They become professionally ineffective. I was thinking about, to Renee's point, with respect to, at what point did you realize that you were kind of, you'd adjusted to it or whatever. And I remember going to a murder, I probably had a couple years on, year and a half, whatever, and there were like 6 people shot, and 3 of them died, and it was at a bar, and some of the scene was out on the sidewalk, some of it was inside, and there was like a whole bunch of people, and 5 people down, a couple of them are dead, all this stuff. And I went home, and I got to my apartment, and I took all my stuff off, and I thought, I don't think I'm really bothered by this at all. Well, I guess I'm adjusting. I must be professionally adapting, because I feel okay from it. The truth was, even though I was able to perform, I think it started to take a toll, little by little in my personal life, where you just that becomes your way of dealing with everything that is controversial, dramatic, whatever. You just, you have an argument with your wife, argument with a friend, whatever, you push that away into that same, and then you become less of a human being. And in fact, I think a lot of the times when we see cops making mistakes, they end up on YouTube, or they end up in the media or whatever, it's because they have a lot of that shit that they never dealt with, and then they go to one scene where they just get pushed a little too far, and it all comes out, and their meltdown is epic. And people say, they make generalizations about police and about this guy's career, but throughout that guy's career of 8 years or 10 years or 20 years, where, how many times did that guy get talked to about what's going on? How is he coping? What's going on, in his mind? Nobody seems to address that. They just, it's like hot potato, and they don't want to deal with it, so they go to the employee assistants or whatever. But it doesn't get to the heart of the issue.
I think as a collective, everybody's just ignored it.
I think that's the biggest barrier, is we don't, and I don't know if it's, we just don't want to be honest and talk about feelings, or maybe nobody has the capacity to actually talk about the emotions that everybody feels and how to deal with it. But just use an example from the military. We in the Balkans, we worked on mass grave sites, and so there's some horrific stuff that's coming out of the ground. We're doing security for them, And the doctors, it was a Swiss forensic team, put up this huge, like, wall of like tarps and stuff, so that the people that are waiting to see who we're pulling out of the ground can't see everything that's going on the other side of it, because it would hurt them.
Sure.
But at the same time, even these people that do it on a regular daily basis, these doctors, they need that levity. They need that moment to just be honest and work and crack jokes and smile a little bit. They take their job very seriously. They do their jobs professionally. When on the other side of that tarp, you would never know the levity and the honesty and the candor that's on the other side of that tarp. And we don't have that in law enforcement, I don't think. We should. There's no excuse for it. I mean, how many times do you get to signal light with somebody in the middle of the night and there's nobody else around? What a perfect moment to gauge where somebody's at, what the level of their reservoir is, you know. But like you said, we wait until this
crisis moment
when and then everybody's aghast. Like, how did that happen? Well, come on.
We all see the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
We know the people who are reaching the limit.
And we do.
Right.
You'll see guys who come and be like, man, this guy's fucked up, or that guy's, this guy's got problems.
Yeah.
That guy, he should really do. And like, have you thought about why that is?
Somebody should really do something about that.
What has that dude or woman been through to get him to the point where they're behaving this way on some call that really has a low level of stress? But again, nobody wants to. It's strange, you know. You tell cops that there's a guy on the other side of a door with a gun, they'll go kick it in, go run in, no problem. But if you tell them that there's someone on the other side of the door who needs to talk about what they're feeling, they'll be like, holy shit, no way,
Call
I
the
can't
fire
do it.
department.
Call the fire department. I'm not doing it. No way. So I don't know what, but hopefully, you know, we can. That's part of why we all started coming together is to address this. Part of our culture. It's a huge gap in our culture, you know. And if we had this kind of problems with firearms training, defensive tactics, we would address it. We'd be worried about it. We'd identify it as a problem, and we would address it. But when it comes to psychological health and balance and all those things, we just want to ignore it and push on to the next thing.
Yeah, and I think in respects to my kind of time frame, how everything kind of fell into law enforcement, I think after about the 3-year mark, I started feeling really comfortable with what I was doing and confident in my abilities as a law enforcement officer, the totality of what I was kind of dealing with. But emotionally, probably about 5 years is when I kind of really saw that I was kind of pushing hard to separate myself from it, that, you know, the switch was just a lot easier to turn off as far as kind of my interaction with humanity on some of these violent scenes. You know, you hate to say that, you know, when somebody's been shot or stabbed or they've been killed, that you can kind of just flip the switch off. But, you know, if your switch is constantly on and night after night after night, that stuff just kind of adds up. And if you can't flip that off, you know, we kind of have that barrier with it. You know, I don't see it as an all too negative thing all the time. Like you said, the problem is that if you can never switch it back over. So I think after about 5 years, that's when I noticed like the emotional detachment, where I could go home and it really didn't affect me. It didn't bother me what happened on shift, whether it was, you know, I was at the scene of a homicide or a bunch of people got shot or a really bad car accident or anything. It was just kind of like, well, this is kind of what we do.
It is what it is.
And, you know, but I guess in reality, a lot of it, I kind of think back to it, is that I'm not causing these issues. So to try to be a solution to it, I'm one of a handful that's actually showing up trying to resolve something that nobody else wants to be a part of.
Yeah. That's actually a coping mechanism, though, that we use, I think, is to offer some perspective and say, you know what, I'm not immersed in this. You know, as a professional, I'm looking at this from the outside, okay? You know, I didn't cause this. I'm going to do my part to fix it or to help whoever needs help. But this you know, horrific scene that you're going into, this isn't my fault. I'm not responsible for it. If anything, I'm the guy coming to offer some assistance to try and help somebody, and I'm going to do the best that I can to render that aid and to help that person. But, you know, if it all goes south, this still isn't my fault. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of times it's easy to become, if you don't have that somewhat of professional detachment, you're going to get immersed into this and start taking some of this stuff personally, and that's going to really degrade you when it doesn't have to, if you look at it with a proper perspective.
And I think
what you're saying.
I think that's absolutely right, because how many times you show up on a scene and the family of a victim or even a victim themselves will get pissed off at us, being like, well, why weren't you here sooner, and where were you, and how could you let... And if you're not careful, you can start to take that on personally and feel responsible for it, you know? So you have to make a distinction between the me and the not me, you know, the things that that you're responsible for and the things that you're not, just like you're saying.
Right.
You know?
I used to get that a lot less in the virgin years of my career. That seems to be like a rampant issue now. the finger pointing, the blame game that's going on.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I don't know. I can't go a single night now without, you know, this is a law enforcement issue.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you called me for an issue that you're having,
Right.
but then I become the center of your problem all of a sudden.
And you've been on for 8 years?
8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's
And it's
public
changed in
service.
8 years.
Oh, it's incredible what's happened in 8 years.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first got on, everybody waved with all their fingers, and now I rarely get
It's just
that.
the one.
It's just the one. The one I get more often than not.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, but it's just. But I think that's the small minority of individuals that we deal with. And, you know, I guess kind of following along their path lines. If we act the way they do and we think the way they do, then the cynicism just runs rampant in law enforcement.
I think
as well.
that's what everybody's saying. That real challenge for police leadership, Sergeant O'Neill, is to help officers,
The mudslinging
Yes,
is
Way
especially-
to call you out.
especially between the 3 and 5 year mark, to like you said, we teach them to shoot, we teach them how to do all this stuff with Narcan and all this other crazy shit, to help somebody get perspective, the proper perspective, to be able to show up at a call. And even though, I think about you on afternoons, that op tempo is ridiculous. I'm sure you probably go home sometimes like, what the fuck just happened?
Right.
I just spent 8 hours in that car and I have no clue.
Right.
If I had to go to court today, right now, I wouldn't be able to tell you what happened. I have to look at
Yep.
my reports and it just happened.
Yep.
But how do you help guys get the proper perspective?
Well, that's the thing. We talk about with the Heroes Project. We talk about learned helplessness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you go to call after call after call, and it's really just like janitor work or like Band-Aid policing, right? I mean, you can't really devote enough time to make a difference or investigate a scene properly. You're just trying to cover all the calls that are coming at you. You start to feel helpless. You can, if you don't have the right perspective, if you don't orient yourself properly to the problem, then you start to think, well, what am I even,
what good am I
this
doing?
is fruitless. The whole
Yep.
thing, I'm risking my life. I'm going through all of this paperwork and all this effort and absorbing all this abuse for what? What's the end game? Why am I doing this?
Well, it goes back to perspective, like you said, because you have to look at it and say, you know what, it's not my job to complete this entire thing. This little bit that I'm doing, this is my responsibility. I'd like to do a lot more. I'd like to, take this to the end, but this is my role right here, and as long as I'm filling my role professionally and doing it well, that's all that I can do.
Find some contentment.
Yeah,
in that.
exactly. Yeah, I'm fulfilling my responsibility, and where it goes after that is that goes to the next guy.
Yeah.
But if you want to shoulder all that, then that's going to get pretty despairing pretty quickly.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, the continuation of the team from shift to shift, I think that's where we run into, I think, a lot of difficulties. I mean, like you said, there's nothing, afternoons, you guys will clear 100 calls by yourself in an 8-hour shift some nights, and then nights we'll deal with, I'll go to 5 or 6 calls some nights when you're going to 90 just 8 hours before me. But I mean, I think when everybody's on the same mental health level, it makes it a lot easier, because we hear a lot of positive things on nights about the stuff that day shift and afternoon shift guys do and things like that. So I mean,
We do positive things.
every now and again.
It's news to me.
I'll relay it to you.
Yeah, there you go. I
They're
appreciate
probably
that.
just
I appreciate
intoxicated
that.
heavily when they say it.
Right.
But, I think the overwhelming majority of stuff that we get is negativity because of the individuals that we deal with. But you start to see it every now and again, and I think we talk about public perception in law enforcement being negative. We're starting to see, at least on nights, more so now than we were even a couple summers ago, that there's still people that are very law enforcement supportive, and they still appreciate what we do and how we deal with the things that we deal with.
But like you said, it's easy to lose sight of that fact, because generally speaking, the people that cops deal with 95% of the time are people who are doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And because of that, they don't want to see you. They don't like what you're doing. They don't believe in what you're doing. It's easy to think everybody feels this way about cops. When the fact of the matter is, there's only a fraction of people that feel this way about cops, but that fraction is the one that you're dealing with 95% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, like you said, if you're not, taking a step back and looking at it from the outside and saying, you know what, reality, this is how it feels.
Yeah.
But reality says that this is not the case. Without that perspective, it can get kind of depressing.
That perspective is extremely valuable under stress too, because you're absolutely right. Most of the people that we're dealing with are doing something wrong. However, we go to a lot of calls where you have the victim and the suspect at the same time. So can you move back and forth between, okay, I need to treat this suspect in a tactical way, get him secured, be cunning and cagey with him, and be able to interview or her, whatever. But at the same time, you've got a victim there.
Right.
So sometimes we have a problem with perception where, we show up to a call and we're kind of addressing it in one way, thinking of the suspect, but then we've got a victim all at the same time. You have, if you've adjusted, you're able to walk between those two worlds to go over and have a conversation with the victim and administer care, whatever, and then be able to talk to the suspect all at the same time. That's a difficult thing, but if you've adjusted, if you've established perspective,
Right.
I think you can do those things. But the perception of that is, if you've just been talking to some ex-con who just stabbed a woman or whatever, and you're in that mindset, then you go over to talk to the victim, you're not always showing maybe the proper sensitivity, or vice versa. You may end up be trying to be too careful with the victim, and then you go over to the suspect and you're not getting any of the information you need. You're not going to be effective because you're still kind of in that mindset. So that's the challenge, is you have to be able to walk in two worlds, and that takes some psychological adjustment, and I don't know that we prepare people for that.
Like I said, we take care of ourselves. The majority of us take care of ourselves on a physical level, but mentally, I think the aptitude that we're required to have to deal with these situations time and time again, and to kind of judge and kind of configure how we're going to approach everybody per incident, I think that's where we run into more difficulties than on the physical aspect.
I think there's a reason too. We're talking about psychological health. There's a reason that a lot of guys, we all know the stereotype of the cops that are eating donuts and 40 pounds overweight and all this stuff. I think that if they're not adjusted psychologically, it affects them physically. Their desire to work out, box, lift weights, run, ride bikes, whatever it is, to engage in physical fitness. The guys that basin, that reservoir we're talking about, get so full of all of that psychological noise that they just end up closing up. You know what I mean? They're not not going out to challenge themselves. They just shut down completely, and then it shows. Either with eating or drinking or whatever it is, and they gain weight and they look unprofessional. And I have to believe that if we were more well-adjusted, more evolved psychologically, we'd probably see better levels of physical fitness in what we do. That's why so many guys start off in such good shape, and then about 5 years in, it's like
can't keep that balance.
That's right.
I think that's where that continuation of the training goes psychologically. I hear more and more guys between the 3 and 5 mark asking why they're doing this.
Right.
Like, what effect are we really having in anything?
And when you come close
it's
to
disheartening to watch it happen to some of these younger guys who are involved in it. It's just,
well, I think what happens to some of those guys is they get close to getting killed at some point. Probably many
Which
times.
time?
Yeah, I was just saying.
Clarify there.
But we're
And
not
the first
talking
time,
about
or?
it.
But we're not
It
talking
happens,
about
but
it.
nobody's talking about it because we all went home safely. So we're
I mean,
not
how
gonna
many
talk
times
about
have you
it.
guys been shot at? How many times have you almost been involved in a car accident, or you've run up on a gunman, or you've dealt with people with guns, or gone to a shots fired, and there's still a whole bunch of people there's suspects still involved on an incident where a shooting's gone on.
And at some point, this causes an individual, especially in the early part of their career, the virginal part of their career, as you put it, to go, why am I doing this? I'm going to end up getting my ass shot off. Why am I doing this? I thought it was to help people, to save people from others and themselves. And then, you're risking your own life. You're going to leave your family without a dad or a brother or whatever, husband. And you say, well, what's the point? Why am I doing this?